The first time the trunk moved on its own, the house held its breath. Wind pressed along the clapboards like a giant palm testing for a heartbeat. Nails creaked. Plaster dust lifted in slow spirals, gilded by a blade of late sun that found a crack in the shingles. Then from the attic, a sound that did not belong to the hour or the weather. Scrape, pause, scrape. Not the blind scurry of a mouse, not the tick of cooling pipes. A deliberate shift, as if a heavy body had taken counsel with itself and pushed an inch farther into fate. Philip Harper stopped with one boot on the stair above, one below. The flashlight jittered in his hand, painting a trembling oval across the ceiling. Beneath him in the kitchen, a kettle began to whisper, the room taking on the low hum of things preparing to become something else. "Ed?" he called, but softly, as though a raised voice might wake whatever the sound came from instead of warning it off. Edward Harper cut the flame and listened. The house listened back. The screen door ticked in its frame. A moth tested glass with dry wings. And then the attic again. Scrape. A breath held. Another scrape. Edward moved to the foot of the stairs. Lark the cattle dog gliding at his heel, hackles lifting as if drawn by an invisible thread. "Don't blink," he said, a smile in the words that didn't reach his eyes. Philip eased upward. Each step told its old story in a long wooden syllable. Hot air carried a smell of lanolin and attic linen. Then, oddly, the clean tang of salt. Ocean salt. So wrong in a landlocked county it felt like a joke the house was playing on them. He pushed the hatch. Hinges screamed. The beam carved a tunnel through the dark and found rafters like ribs. And the trunk. It squatted near the far wall, leather-skinned and seamed, brass corners dulled to a swampy green. The hasp, long since missing its lock, lay crooked as a broken tooth. The beam steadied. The hasp nodded, no more than a breath width, but it moved. The trunk slid a fraction as if the floor had become a shallow tide and it was obeying a moon they could not see. Philip's throat clicked. "Ed." Edward's shoulder found his. Two circles of light overlapped and steadied, and within the doubled shine the detail sharpened. A groove cut into the boards, pale wood showing where dark varnish had been scuffed away by fresh force. Not an old track. New. The kind of mark you could run a fingertip along and feel a story beginning under the splinters. From inside the trunk came a delicate sound. A hollow knock once, then twice. The rhythm of a request or a warning, or the world on the other side asking if this was the right address. The house seemed to lean closer around them, timber and nail and dust all breathing in. Lark's growl deepened until it wasn't a sound but a vibration through floor and bone, anchoring them in place. Philip reached out, palm flat to the lid. Heat kissed his skin. Beneath the leather, something trembled. Regular, patient, mechanical, like a watch laid against a wrist not its own. "What's buried under us?" Philip whispered. "Maybe the wrong question," Edward said. "Maybe it's what's surfaced." A gust shoved the roof and the ladder shuddered. Downstairs, the back door rattled. And then, 3 knuckles on wood, crisp and official, someone knocked on the front porch. A man's voice followed, bright as a badge. "Afternoon, county assessor. Anyone home?" The trunk gave a third small knock as if to say, "Choose. Now." They hadn't meant to buy a haunted house. They'd meant to buy a second chance. Edward, older by 6 quiet minutes, carried his thoughts like tools. Careful, oiled, each in its place. Philip talked with his hands and made plans with his boots. He believed in moving toward trouble before it grew roots. They had been farm boys all their lives, and poor most of them. Poor in the respectable way that stacked firewood straight and kept Sunday shirts ironed even when the pantry thinned. The last drought took the rest. Topsoil, savings, the lease on land their father had coaxed through 4 bad harvests. When the landlord's son shook their hands, it felt like a door closing with courtesy. The county auction listed one property that hadn't been bulldozed into a tax write-off, a deserted farmhouse with shoulders slumped and porches leaning, but with a well that still caught water and a stand of cottonwoods that remembered shade. The pasture was a patient brown. The creek out back hadn't forgotten spring. The price was a number 2 men could meet without selling their names. They signed with borrowed pens. They drove there in a pickup that knew better days, the windows down to make the quiet sound like wind. They brought little, a mattress that sagged in the middle like a hard year, 2 crates of tools, a skillet blacker than sin and twice as useful, the dog Lark, and a stubborn kind of hope. The house met them with smells: old apples, dry wool, mouse, but also with something sweeter, a sense that it had been waiting to be asked for its stories. And if you're here because you live for that moment when a life turns, when the floor creaks and you lean toward the sound instead of away, then pull up a chair at our table, subscribe, ring the bell so you don't miss what comes up the stairs next. Tell us in the comments where you're watching from. We read them all on the porch after the work's done. This channel is for people who like their mysteries with dirt under the fingernails and their miracles shaped like second chances. By morning, they had a plan. Start at the top, tame the roof, sweep the attic, work down. Patch first, paint later. Eat what you can grow and fix what you can't afford to replace. Keep your debts where you can see them. And if the house speaks, listen. It did. In the hour when heat gathers like a thought and the flies go drowsy, the trunk in the attic slid an inch toward a knothole that breathed cold where no cold should be. Salt rode that breath. A clean ocean cut that made Edward think of maps and Philip think of ships and both of them think of trouble. They were not alone in their interest. Tracks dusted the porch that morning that weren't theirs. A neat boot with a square heel and a walking stick's little round punctuation mark beside each pair. The county assessor, the knock had said. Just a man with a ledger. But the voice had sounded like someone who already knew the sum and simply wanted signatures to match. Edward looked at Philip the way he had when they were boys, and the creek swelled. I'll take the rope, you take the branch. Philip nodded back. Then we'll both make it across or we won't go at all. They climbed for the trunk together. By noon, the attic baked like a kiln. Light fell through gaps in the shingles in thin white knives. Dust turned in the beams like slow snow. The trunk sat in the far corner, not quite square to anything, as if it had been aligned to a compass they couldn't see. Its leather, cross-hatched with cracks, wore scars darker than age alone, burned crescents, tar-black rivulets, a web of salt crust like dried tears. Philip brushed a sleeve across the lid until gilt letters lifted. R. H. The initials sank their hooks into him with the weight of a name he should know and didn't. He set his ear to the leather. Heat touched skin. Beneath, a minute tremor ticked, too slow for a heart, too steady for an animal. Somewhere water moved. He jerked back, meeting Edward's eye. Hear that? Edward hadn't heard, but he felt it in his teeth, the way thunder sometimes arrived as a pressure before a sound. He slid the pry bar under a loose board where the trunk's groove ended. The plank lifted with a dry gasp, revealing a shallow channel hand-chiseled into the joist cavity. In it lay a glass insulator fat as a plum, caught in old tar, a loop of cloth-wrapped wire and, impossible, a neat trickle of clean, damp sand. He scooped a pinch. It was cold. On his tongue it tasted like mornings on a pier he had never stood on, like foghorns and gulls he had never heard. Lark sneezed hard, then stared not at the trunk but a blank angle of air beside it, weight shifting, a low warning in her chest. Whoever RH is, Philip said, they put the ocean in a box. Or the ocean found a way out of one, Edward said. Knuckles at the door again, less patient. Gentlemen, the voice floated up the stairwell. County Assessor, Raymond Holt. Sorry to intrude. Just tying up a few compliances. The name snapped tight in Edward's head. He'd seen it on the ledger. Raymond Holt. A signature that looked like a steel trap. Philip and Edward looked at each other. Phillips's face said, "Stall him." Edward said, "Learn him." They went down. Raymond Holt stood on the porch in a cream suit that had never met dust and a hat that shadowed a smile too pure to be true. He was older than he sounded, or younger than he wanted to look. A cane with a silver cap leaned against the railing. Behind him, a black sedan idled, new enough to make all the older things around it look like they were rotting faster out of shame. "Fine property," Holt said, gaze slipping past them over their shoulders as if cataloging rooms his shoes had already visited. "Shame about the arrears, but I'm sure two industrious men can get a place like this compliant. Might even make something of it." Philip shifted, polite on top of protective. "We signed the papers, paid what was asked." "Of course," Holt smiled wider, "and the county is grateful to have such stewards. I do have a small addendum here regarding fixtures, things attached to the structure that may or may not convey matters of title. Old properties get tangled, don't they? If there are any, say, trunks or safes affixed to beams, we'd need to note them." He lifted his cane an inch, tapping the porch rail as if to punctuate. Tap, tap. Easier to itemize now than litigate later. Edward watched the cane. He watched the hatband's faint salt stain. He watched the man's eyes flick instinctively toward the roofline over the kitchen where the attic ran deep. He said nothing for a long beat. letting silence push the next sentence out of Holt like a lodestone draws a nail. Also, Holt said, RH sends his regards. Lark's growl found teeth. The brothers did not move, but the world seemed to. Holt's smile did not crack. I represent certain historical interests. The county is full of curios, Mr. Harper, Edward, yes, but some curios belong to institutions. He slid a card from an inner pocket. Raymond Holt, collections. No address, no number. Just a name and a title that assumed you knew how to reach him if you mattered. Philip held the door. We're restoring. Compliant. Busy. Holt considered the word restoring the way a cat might consider a bird behind glass. Of course. My congratulations. I'll check back. He did not wait to be dismissed. He did not look at the trunk. He did not need to look. He left the smell of cologne and cold coin trailing down the steps. They watched the sedan shrink along the road, the dust it raised unable to touch the paint. When the sound washed away, the house sighed, the kind of long exhale buildings make when the weather breaks. The brothers climbed. The attic felt smaller, the trunk larger. The hasp now lay flush as if smoothed by a hand. The groove had lengthened a finger's width. From within, a hollow knock resumed, slower now, patient as a metronome waiting for the first violin. Philip set both hands to the lid. If he knows, we should know more. Edward nodded. He looked around for leverage, for signal. That was when he noticed the initials weren't just letters. They were brand marks, overstruck. RH had been pressed atop another name, Bertha Harper, ghosted faintly under the tarnish, a family overlap like rings on a tree. Their grandmother's cousin had been a Bertha Harper, a widow who vanished the winter the river froze black and stayed that way. Family legend said she took the midnight train and never wrote. But train tickets didn't put salt in attics. Edward worked the pry bar under a hinge. The leather gave a tired moan, then a soft, almost relieved sigh. Cold air spilled, smelling of brine and rain on iron. The lid rose an inch and stuck, held from the inside by a hook and eye that had no business being there. He lifted the beam of the flashlight into that inch and froze. Water moved in the dark. Not water like a jug sloshing. Water like a calm tide, rising and falling in a space that couldn't possibly hold it. In the thinnest slice of light, tiny shapes flickered, silver-like coins that swam, not sank. The knock came again, not from the lid now, but from below the waterline, as if someone, or something, tapped a wall. Philip whispered without breath, "It's a window." "To where?" Edward breathed back. A distant horn answered, low and mournful, so soft it could have been memory. Lark whined, pawing at the groove marks with a frantic urgency that said, "Move it." The trunk, feeling the light, slid another fraction toward the knothole where cold gathered. Edward pulled the barn scale from a nail and set its hook into the lid bracket. "On 3, he said. They heaved. Leather protested. The hidden hook let go. The lid swung wider, 4 inches, then 5, and the attic air roared, pulled into the trunk like breath into lungs that had been waiting too long. A gust snuffed the beam. In the sudden dark, sea cold climbed their arms. The sound of water filled the room. Not loud, not crashing, but vast. Lark barked once. Sharp. Philip snapped the flashlight back on. Beneath the open lid lay a chamber not bounded by wood. Night blue distance breathed there. A length of rope lay coiled on a worn plank. No, a deck, just inside the threshold where attic boards gave way to another place. And there, tied to that rope, sat a small brass bell, its rim dented, its clapper wrapped in old cloth. The bell moved, tugged by a current neither attic nor prairie could claim. The knock had been the clapper's wrapped head touching the bell's throat, again and again asking. Edward leaned in until the brine made his eyes water. Far, far below, a shadow turned. Large, sinuous, not quite named by anything you'd find in a farm book. He pulled back, heart thudding in a new rhythm that tried to set itself to the bell. Philip whispered what Edward wouldn't say. "We're not alone in this." From the yard came the crunch of tires on gravel, then the cut of an engine. Holt hadn't gone far, or he had sent someone who wore quieter shoes. "Board it," Edward said. "Understand it," Philip countered. Lark made the decision. She grabbed the hem of Edward's work shirt and tugged him backward with a strength the dog's body shouldn't have had, hauling both men out of reach of the lid as it yawned wider on its own. The bell struck properly then, clear, bright, a note that found every nail in the house and set them humming sympathetically. Downstairs, the front door latch turned. Pressure changed. The attic air grew denser the way air does when lightning thinks about choosing a point. From the trunk rose a rime of shining salt crystals, ghost fast as frost. They crawled along the lid, traced the initials, reached the groove, and stopped, as if listening for the right word to spell next. Edward set his palm on the leather. "Bertha," he said to the letters beneath the letters. The crystals brightened along the ghost name, acknowledging, then held. Philip drew breath to argue or pray. Neither came out. He nodded instead. "We move it," he said. "Down. Somewhere Holt can't find." "Where?" Edward asked. Philip looked at the kitchen below like a man calculating the path of a storm. "Cellar. They would need time. They did not have it." The front door opened. Holt didn't step into the house so much as he adjusted the house to make room for him. Boots not dusty. Smile not kind. Hat brim marking a line between his weather and theirs. "Left my pen," he said, as if that explained the broken lock and the unlocked truth of him. "Mind if I—" Edward met him at the threshold, with a bucket and a rag, as if this were about mopping, not trespass. Philip drifted sideways, angling himself between Holt and the stairwell, wide-shouldered without seeming to be. Lark sat, then lay down in the way cattle dogs do when they're about to spring, a coil pretending to be a rug. "Pen's not here," Edward said. "Memory says otherwise," Holt said, and smiled a little wider at the lie he demanded they both share. He tapped the brim of his hat and took one more polite step into a home he had no right to. Philip grinned in the country way that means leave before somebody shows you how. "Mr. Holt, we're fixing the upstairs floor. Loose boards. Not safe. Safety is the county's concern," Holt said, which might have been true if he were the county. The bell rang again, faint through roof and joists, a single clean note like a compass choosing north. Holt's head tilted no more than a hair, but it tilted. "You do hear it," he said softly. Not a question. Philip's grin glazed into something harder. "Hear what?" Holt let the silence do his talking. It told the truth. He had heard it before. He had followed it across deeds and wills, across 5 families' bad luck. He had waited out winters and wars for that particular ring. He walked toward the stairs as if called by his Christian name. Edward stepped into his path, bucket and rag becoming a shield. "We'll bring your pen if we find it, Mr. Holt." Holt's smile finally cracked enough to show one canine that didn't belong to his face. "You misunderstand," he said in a voice that lost the county and found the man. "What's upstairs isn't yours to open. It isn't yours to keep. It isn't yours to even love wrong. It belongs to the registry now. And to me." "Registry of what?" Philip asked. Holt tapped the silver cap of his cane against the stair rail. Tap, 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 measuring something only he knew. "Of doors," he said, as if that were a reasonable word. "Of thresholds. Of the conveniently lost. We close what others open foolishly, or we open what others shut out of fear. Depends on the harm." He lifted his gaze to the ceiling, listening for the bell like a man listening for rain on a tin roof. "That one upstairs," he said with a small, reverent nod, "is the oldest in the county. R.H. kept it safe a long time, until she didn't." "R.H. is a she?" Philip asked. "Was," Holt corrected, and something like respect trimmed his smile. "Rebecca Harper. They called her Bertha in church to make her smaller. It didn't work. She was a warden before we had a word for it. Tied that door shut when the river went black. Paid for it with her name." A thin, cold current slipped down the stairwell like a scarf being unwound. Lark stood, head low, tail still, eyes locked on Holt's cane. Edward could see the calculus running beneath Holt's hat brim. 2 men, 1 dog, 1 door, and time, which was always on the side of men with papers and friends in offices. Philip moved first. Not up. Down. He peeled away toward the kitchen, then the back hall, then the cellar door, not hurrying, whistling a tune their mother used when she wanted a calf to think everything was fine. Holt, amused, did not turn. Edward did. In the cellar, damp lived in the stone like a memory. Earth smell thickened the air. Shelves held the ghosts of apples. The coal bin yawned. The old root room had a heavy door cross-braced by iron. Philip took the lantern and shouldered into the darkness, counting steps, mapping corners. If a thing from the attic was going to be hidden, it would be hidden where the house remembered how to keep food through winter. Cold, dark, dry, defended. Upstairs, Holt tilted his head. "You'll only hurt yourself lifting it," he said, conversational as weather. "And you'll hurt others if you open it wrong. Like you would open it right," Edward said. Holt considered. I would open it for the right, he said, and the preposition mattered. Philip appeared behind him, quiet as a fox, hands empty, face composed. He'd found what he needed in the cellar, a length of block and tackle still oiled from a grandfather's stubborn thrift, 2 barn planks straight enough to be rails, a dolly with 1 soft wheel, and a quilt to keep secrets from leaving bruises on edges. He nodded once to Edward. Edward's grip on the bucket shifted. Mr. Holt, he said, we appreciate your concern. I'm sure, Holt said, and we'll see you in the morning. You'll see me when the bell stops, Holt said, honest as a thrown rock, and let himself out. The sedan's door shut with a sound like a check clearing. They moved. Rails up the back stairs. Quilt on the trunk. Hook in the bracket. The block and tackle sang a low work song as they took the weight and walked it forward an inch at a time. The lid creaked complaints, but the bell kept its counsel. Salt crystals powdered the quilt like frost on a window. Lark trotted ahead, pausing at every turn, checking angles like a good foreman. At the head of the stairs, the world tilted. Not gravity. Place. The trunk grew heavier in a way not measured by pounds, as if insisting it had the right to stay, as if the house itself were bracing against the theft. Edward murmured to it without meaning to. We're keeping you safe. The bell gave 1 soft ring as if to say, we will see. Down 1 flight, then another. Through the pantry where the floor safe held only mouse nests. Across the kitchen worn smooth by women's work who never learned their names in books. Into the cellar stairwell that smelled like potatoes and secrets. They settled the trunk in the root room behind the iron-braced door and slid the bolt. The bell stilled, then rang once, as if committing the room to memory. Salt air thinned. Warmth returned. August, dry and honest. For a heartbeat, the house felt like a farmhouse again. Philip leaned on the wall and blew out a breath that wobbled. Now what? Now we figure out what Bertha tied shut, Edward said. They waited until full dark. Then they brought chairs, the lantern, a notebook, the pocket Bible from their father's coat, a jar of nails to weigh pages, and sat across from the trunk like students at an old teacher's desk. Edward tried names. Rebecca Harper. The crystals brightened on the ghost letters. Bertha, he said more softly, and the bell trembled as if hearing a diminutive like a prayer. He tried questions. Where? The bell gave a confused little clink. When? The salt along the rim slumped, as if time did not hold steady in the space the lid revealed. Philip tried stories. He spoke the family tale of the winter the river froze black, of a train that screamed without smoke, of a woman in a red shawl walking out on ice that didn't crack, and he felt foolish until the bell answered on the last word. 1, 2, 3. He tried again with what Holt had said. Warden, he whispered. Door. The lantern flame guttered, then straightened. Water sighed in the trunk like someone turning in their sleep. Edward opened the lid 1 inch. Cold washed his knuckles. He pressed his face close enough to smell iron and rain. Far down, something bright as a match flared and died. He closed it and swallowed salt. It's not a box, he said, throat tight. It's a hinge. So if somebody opens from the other side, Philip said, what happens to our side? The bell rang, clear as a church at noon. The sedan returned. Headlights washed the kitchen window with white. Doors opened. More than one. Men's shoes shuffled gravel. Holt's voice threaded between them, calm and certain. Quietly, this is not the first door you've carried. Edward looked at his brother like the boy in him, looking at the boy in the creek. Rope, branch. Philip nodded back like the boy on the bank. I'll hold. Jump. They blew out the lantern. They lifted the lid 2 inches, then 3. The cellar air turned to tide. A wind rushed into the trunk from the room, dragging at their shirts. The bell pealed, full-throated now, the note big enough to live in the bones of the house. Upstairs, the front door swung wide. Time to choose, Philip said. They chose. Holt came down the stairs with 2 men who wore work like they wore their suits, loosely, and only to keep their shirts clean. Canvas straps crossed their chests. One carried a crowbar polished by misuse. The other, a coil of chain. Holt himself carried nothing but the certainty that rooms allowed him. He stopped at the root room door and placed his palm on the wood. Open, he said. Not to the brothers, to the door. It did not obey him. Edward slid the bolt back. The iron groaned. The men with Holt took a step forward, then checked. because the air pushing past them toward the trunk smelled like a storm blowing in between skyscrapers. Wet, electric, unarguable. Holt saw the lid up and smiled a small, sincere smile of relief. "Thank you," he said. "You don't know what you've saved yourselves from." Philip laughed without humor. "You're welcome." Holt stepped toward the trunk, then halted when Lark put herself in the narrowest spot, and bristled until her shadow looked wolf-big. He inclined his head to the dog. "Warden," he said gently, and Lark's growl slid up a note into confusion. Holt's eyes warmed with pity and calculation at once. "Not you, little one. Not your job. You just remember." He turned to the brothers. "Here's how this goes," he said. "We close it, we mark it. We take it to where such things are tended. We do not open out of curiosity. We do not pretend we can own what we can only survive." Philip's chin lifted. "Then why do your men have chains?" "In case we disagree about the order," Holt said, and the candor almost made him human. The bell rang hard enough to set dust falling. The water in the trunk drew back, revealing more of the deck, a plank worn by feet that crossed between worlds before anyone asked permission. On that plank, a scrawl cut by a pocket knife glinted, "R.H. Hold Fast." Holt saw it and nodded once, almost like a salute. "She knew," he said. "She always did." Edward stepped between Holt and the trunk. "Tell us," he said. "All of it, or you don't touch it." Holt weighed a lie and found it too heavy to carry up these stairs. "There are doors," he said, "older than maps. They show up where the land is thin and the heart is stubborn. Some open to storms you can't outlast. Some open to rooms where you can leave something you can't carry one day longer. Some open to places where you can still say a name and have it mean more than sound. Bertha kept this one because it tried to take more than it gave. She bound it with bell and brass and her own good name. But bindings rot. Men forget, and tides don't." "What's on the other side?" Philip asked. Holt's gaze drifted to the far distance inside the trunk. "Depends on how you knock." The crowbar man shifted, impatient, eager for the part where muscle solved what words complicated. Holt flicked his fingers and the man stilled. Edward looked down into the blue dark and felt his father's hand on his shoulder the day the tractor flipped and did not break him. He felt his mother's hymn thrumming through the floorboards when a storm gave the wheat back after months of nothing. He felt Bertha, cutting her name into a plank with a pocket knife, deciding the world would be one way and not another. He took the bell's wrapped clapper gently between thumb and forefinger and lifted the cloth free. "Careful," Holt said softly. The bell's next note was naked and bright as a star falling. Water surged to meet it. A shadow lifted far below, huge and graceful. Up in the kitchen, glass sang in the cupboards. Holt's men staggered and swore. Lark barked, joyous or terrified or both. Philip grabbed Edward's belt and anchored him as a wind like the breath of a tunnel roared into the trunk. "Now would be a fine time," Philip shouted over the sound, "to tell us the part where we don't drown on dry ground." Holt's voice came taut and precise. "You don't drown if you keep your word. Close it on the last ring. Not before, not after. Last ring, and say the keeper's name." "Whose?" Edward demanded. "Yours," Holt said, eyes on the lid. The bell rang once, twice, 3 times, the old church cadence that told a county somebody had died. The third note hung, yearning toward a fourth that didn't come, and the water lifted toward the lip like a hand reaching up from deep, asking to be taken or to take. Edward's heartbeat found the bell. He waited, every muscle screaming to shut it now, now, now. He waited until his bones knew the shape of the last note as if he'd been born listening for it. The last ring shivered through the room. "Edward Harper," he said, clear and full. The lid fell. The wind died. The trunk thudded with a finality that walked through their bodies and sat down on the cellar steps to rest. Silence rang where sound had been. A long breath later, water began to drip from somewhere that did not exist, pattering a small puddle onto stone. Salt crystals flared and faded like fireflies choosing another field. Lark lay down, head on paws, and let out a sigh that forgave everyone. Holt exhaled. He had not breathed either. He lifted his hat and scrubbed a hand across a hairline striped by old sun. For the first time he looked tired. "You have the word now," he said to Edward. "Warden, keeper, it won't open without you, or it will open wrong without you, which is worse." Philip, still holding Edward's belt, snorted. "So we're drafted." Holt smiled, small and unvarnished. "You promoted yourselves." Crowbar man shifted again. Chain man looked green. Holt gestured, and both backed away an inch, as if from a warm stove. Holt turned to the trunk with a respect that looked like grief. "R.H. would be pleased," he said. "I thought you wanted to take it," Philip said. "I wanted to keep it from fools," Holt said. "If you can carry a bell note like that without breaking, you're not fools." He set a card on the root room shelf. No number, no address, just a name, a title, and, new now, the single hand-inked word beneath, Warden. "Call when it changes," Holt said. "It will. They all do." He left the way he came, shoes whispering on stone, cane tapping the rhythm of a man who had found what he came for and left it where it belonged. They slept in chairs in the cellar, the trunk between them like a stove, radiating a cool that somehow comforted. When Edward woke near dawn, the bell was quiet, and the salt had melted into a damp ring that dried as he watched. He wrote in the notebook, "Last ring. Keeper's name. Door is a hinge." Bertha held fast. "We hold now." Philip woke with a grunt and a grin. "We didn't drown," he said, and stretched until his back cracked and his fear shook loose. They carried the trunk to a corner of the root room where the floor sat most square and the wall most true. They built a platform of planks and old brick to lift it from damp. They wrapped the bell's clapper again with lark, watching solemnly as if approving a rite. They painted "Hold Fast" over the iron door in black letters that would not come off in a hurry. Upstairs the house felt different, lighter, as if an old argument had finally been settled. They patched shingles, they scrubbed floors. They set the skillet on the stove and fried eggs that tasted like courage. When the noon wind came up, it smelled of cut hay and creek, not brine. A week later, a letter arrived without stamp or postmark, folded in a plain envelope that had found them through no ordinary route. Inside, on heavy paper, 3 sentences in a neat script. "The county thanks you for your stewardship. Keep your records, keep your promises. When the bell rings for something you cannot name, say your own, and close it on the last note. R.H." Philip turned the page over as if a secret might be hiding in the grain. "You think?" Edward smiled. "I think Bertha found a way to keep writing. They kept their lives simple. They fixed fences. They planted winter wheat. They paid what they owed. Once in October the bell rang twice and the attic filled with cold blue light without their climbing a stair. Edward stood at the bottom of the steps and said his name with the kind of gentleness he used to use on colts. The light went out like a lamp turned for the night. Holt did not return, or he returned in ways that left no marks they could see. But sometimes, when the road dust hung like gauze at sundown, a car paused beyond the cottonwoods, and a man in a cream hat lifted a hand in a salute that might have been for them, or for the house, or for the door that neither owned. In December, a boy from the neighboring place wandered into their yard, chasing a paper boat that the creek had carried too far. He stopped dead at the cellar door and said simply, "It sounds like the ocean," though there was no sound. Edward crouched to his height and said, "Sometimes it does. That means the world is bigger than it looks, and we're in charge of making sure it doesn't leak where it shouldn't." The boy nodded like that made sense and ran home to tell his mother that the Harpers kept the sea under their house, which by spring had become the truth people told even if they didn't believe it. Truth is like that. It likes a good porch. They never opened the trunk farther than they needed to. They learned its weather, the way a fisherman learns a sky. On nights when the wind went still and Lark's ears tilted toward nothing, they sat on the cellar steps and listened to the bell decide which world needed guarding more. Sometimes Edward sang the hymn their mother loved. Sometimes Philip told the trunk about crops and neighbors and the joke about the 2 twins who bought a haunted house and found out it was really a job. And if you've come this far with us, if you've felt the breath of a tide in a dry room and heard a bell count down to courage, stay. There are more doors in this county than the map bothers to show, and not all of them are under floors. Subscribe, ring that bell, the other kind, and tell us where you're watching from. We've got coffee on and chairs enough. Next time we'll take you out to the old surveyor's shack on the ridge where the compass spins and the photographs refuse to dry. You won't want to miss it. Hold fast. Keep your word. Close it on the last ring. And if anyone asks who kept the door when the tide rose in the cellar of a prairie house, tell them 2 brothers did, Edward and Philip Harper, because someone before them wrote a promise into wood and they decided to live inside it.